Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to our channel. My name is Shahid, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have you join me today. We're about to embark on an exciting journey, diving deep into the heart of English grammar. Now, I know grammar can sometimes feel a little daunting, perhaps even a bit intimidating, but I promise you, by the end of this session, you'll feel much more confident and equipped. We're going to break down complex ideas into simple, digestible pieces, making learning both effective and enjoyable. Today we're focusing on 10 absolutely essential topics in English grammar that are fundamental for anyone looking to master the language. Think of these as the building blocks that will strengthen your communication skills, whether you're writing an email, having a conversation, or preparing for an exam. We'll cover everything from how to describe personalities with adjectives to understanding the nuances of countable and uncountable nouns, and even mastering the past simple tense. Each topic is a stepping stone towards fluency and clarity, so grab your notebooks, perhaps a cup of tea or coffee, and get comfortable. We're going to explore these concepts together, with plenty of examples and clear explanations. My goal is to make this learning experience as engaging and supportive as possible. Are you ready to boost your grammar skills and unlock new levels of English proficiency? Fantastic! Let's get started and dive right into our first topic. All right, let's kick things off with a really interesting and useful area, adjectives of personality. Now, what exactly are these? Well, simply put, adjectives of personality are words we use to describe what someone is like, their character, their traits, the way they tend to behave or interact with the world. Think about your friends, your family, or even characters in books and movies. How would you describe them? The words you'd use, words like kind, funny, generous, shy, or outgoing, those are all adjectives of personality. They help us paint a picture of an individual's inner qualities. These adjectives are incredibly important because they allow us to convey so much information about a person in just a few words. Instead of saying, "She always thinks about other people's feelings and tries to help them," you could simply say, "She is considerate." See how much more concise and impactful that is. Using the right adjective can make your descriptions more vivid and your understanding of others more nuanced. It's all about adding depth and detail to how we perceive and talk about people. This is crucial not just in casual conversation, but also in more formal settings, like writing character analyses or even in job interviews when describing your own strengths. Let's consider a few more examples to really get a feel for this. If someone is always looking on the bright side of life, we might call them optimistic. If they are very careful and pay great attention to detail, they could be described as meticulous. Someone who is calm and doesn't get easily upset could be even-tempered. Notice how each word captures a specific facet of someone's personality. The more adjectives of personality you know, the better you'll be able to express these subtle differences and understand the people around you. It really enriches your vocabulary and your ability to communicate effectively. It's also worth noting that some personality adjectives can have positive connotations, while others might be seen as negative, and some are fairly neutral. For instance, brave is generally positive, arrogant is typically negative, and a word like reserved could be seen as neutral or depend on context. Understanding these nuances is key. When you're learning these adjectives, try to think about their connotations and perhaps even an antonym or opposite. For example, the opposite of generous might be stingy or selfish. This will help you build a more complete understanding. So as we move forward, I encourage you to start noticing these words more in your daily life. When you read an article, watch a show, or listen to a conversation, pay attention to how people are described. Try to identify the adjectives of personality being used and think about what they tell you. Perhaps even start a small vocabulary list of new personality adjectives you encounter. This active engagement is one of the best ways to expand your understanding and make these words a natural part of your own English vocabulary. Next up, we're going to tackle a pair of concepts that often cause a bit of confusion for English learners: quantifiers and classifiers. While they both relate to nouns, they serve distinct purposes. Let's start with quantifiers. As the name suggests, quantifiers tell us about quantity, how much or how many of something there is. They answer questions like how much or how many. Examples of quantifiers include words like some, any, many, much, a lot of, few, little, several, and numbers like 1, 2, 3. Quantifiers are essential because they help us be specific about amounts. without necessarily giving an exact number, although sometimes they do. For instance, you might say, I have some apples, or there isn't much sugar left. Some quantifiers are used with countable nouns like apples. You can count them: 1 apple, 2 apples, such as many, few, several. Others are used with uncountable nouns like sugar. You generally don't count 1 sugar, 2 sugars, such as much, little. And then some, like some, any, a lot of, can be used with both. Understanding this distinction is crucial for correct usage. Now, let's shift our focus to classifiers. Classifiers, also sometimes known as measure words or counters in some contexts, though the term classifier is broader, are words that are used with nouns to specify the type or category of the noun, or to count uncountable nouns by providing a unit of measurement. This is particularly prominent in some languages, but English has its own system, often involving phrases. For uncountable nouns, we often use classifiers to make them countable. For example, water is uncountable, but we can say a glass of water or 2 bottles of water. Here, glass and bottles are acting as classifiers or units of measure. The main difference, then, is that quantifiers express an amount, while classifiers help to categorize or unitize a noun, especially uncountable ones, so they can be counted or specified. Think of it this way: a quantifier tells you how much or how many, while a classifier often tells you what kind of unit or what category. For example, with advice, uncountable, you might say some advice, quantifier, or a piece of advice, classifier phrase. With bread, uncountable, you could have a lot of bread, quantifier, or a loaf of bread or a slice of bread, classifier phrases. It's important to practice recognizing and using both. Pay attention to how native speakers use words like some, any, much, many, and also notice the phrases they use for uncountable nouns: a cup of coffee, a bar of chocolate, a sheet of paper. These patterns will become more familiar with exposure and practice. Understanding quantifiers and classifiers will significantly improve the precision and naturalness of your English, helping you express yourself much more clearly when talking about amounts and types of things. Let's delve into one of the foundational concepts in English grammar: countable and uncountable nouns. Understanding the difference between these two types of nouns is absolutely vital because it affects so many other grammatical choices we make, such as which articles to use, a and the, which quantifiers are appropriate, like many versus much, and whether the noun can be pluralized. So, what's the basic distinction? Countable nouns, as the name implies, are things we can count individually. They have both a singular and a plural form. For example, 1 book, 2 books, 1 chair, 2 chairs, 1 idea, 2 ideas. These countable nouns can be preceded by a or an in their singular form. I saw a cat, and can be used with numbers. She has 3 sisters. When we want to ask about the quantity of a countable noun, we use how many. For instance, how many students are in the class? It seems straightforward, and for many common objects it is. Think about everyday items around you: pens, cups, phones, trees. These are all typically countable. The ability to add an ss or es to make them plural is a key characteristic. Now, let's turn to uncountable nouns, sometimes called mass nouns. These are nouns that refer to substances, concepts, qualities, or abstract ideas that we don't typically count as individual units. They are seen as a whole or a mass. Examples include water, rice, information, advice, music, happiness, furniture, luggage. These nouns usually only have a singular form. We don't say waters unless referring to different bodies of water, which is a specific context, or furnitures or advices. They cannot be directly preceded by a or an in the way countable singulars can, nor can you use numbers directly with them like 2 rices. When we want to quantify uncountable nouns, we often use quantifiers like much, little, some, a lot of, or we use those classifier phrases we just talked about in the previous chapter. For example, I don't have much time, or can I have some water, or I need a piece of information. To ask about the quantity of an uncountable noun, we use how much. For example, how much money do you have? This distinction between how many for countables and how much for uncountables is a very important one to remember. Some nouns can be tricky because they might be countable in your native language but uncountable in English, or vice versa, or they can be both countable and uncountable but with different meanings. For example, hair is generally uncountable. She has long brown hair. But if you're talking about individual strands, you could say there are 3 hairs on your shoulder. Another example is time. I don't have much time, uncountable general concept versus I've been there 3 times, countable specific instances. So always pay attention to context. Learning lists of common uncountable nouns is a great starting point. Chapter 4. Now let's explore a vital set of tools for creating more sophisticated and coherent sentences: contrast linkers. These are words or phrases that we use to connect 2 ideas that are different or contrasting in some way. They signal to the reader or listener that there's a shift or an opposition between the clauses or sentences they join. Using contrast linkers effectively can make your writing and speaking much more nuanced and demonstrate a better command of English structure. They help to show logical relationships between ideas rather than just presenting them as separate, unrelated statements. Some of the most common contrast linkers include words like but, however, although, though, even though, while, whereas, and phrases like in spite of, despite, and on the other hand. Each of these has its own subtle nuances in terms of usage and punctuation, but their core function is to highlight a contrast. For example, you could say it was raining, but we still went for a walk. The word but clearly signals that the second idea, going for a walk, is somewhat unexpected given the first idea, it was raining. Let's look at although, though, and even though. These are often used to introduce a subordinate clause that presents a contrasting idea to the main clause. For example, although it was expensive, he bought the car, or he bought the car though it was expensive, even though often implies a stronger contrast. However is a very useful conjunctive adverb. It usually starts a new sentence or is set off by semicolons and commas, indicating a contrast with the previous statement. The team played well, however they didn't win the match. While and whereas are excellent for directly comparing 2 different facts or situations. For instance, my brother likes coffee while I prefer tea. Or whereas some people love a busy city life, others prefer the tranquility of the countryside. These linkers really help to draw a clear line between the 2 contrasting elements. Then we have despite and in spite of, which are prepositions and are followed by a noun, pronoun, or gerund, being form of a verb. For example, despite the rain, we enjoyed our picnic, or in spite of feeling tired, she continued working. Mastering contrast linkers will significantly elevate the quality of your English. It allows you to express complex thoughts and show how different ideas relate to each other, particularly when they are in opposition. When you're reading, try to spot these linkers and observe how they function within sentences and paragraphs. When you're writing, think about whether you have contrasting ideas that could be more effectively connected using one of these words or phrases. This will add a layer of sophistication and clarity to your communication, making your arguments or descriptions more compelling. Chapter 5. We've already touched upon adjectives of personality, but now let's broaden our scope to discuss descriptive adjectives in general. Descriptive adjectives are words that, quite simply, describe nouns or pronouns. They provide more information about the qualities, characteristics, or state of being of the things we're talking about. Think of them as the words that add color, texture, size, shape, and detail to our language. Without descriptive adjectives, our sentences would be very plain and uninformative. They are the artist's palette of the linguistic world. Descriptive adjectives answer questions like what kind, which one, how many. Although how many can also be quantifiers, some descriptive adjectives specify number like several or numerous in a descriptive sense. For example, instead of just saying I saw a dog, you could say I saw a small, brown, fluffy dog. The words small, brown, and fluffy are all descriptive adjectives that give us a much clearer and more vivid picture of the dog. They engage the senses and help the listener or reader to visualize what is being described. These adjectives can describe a whole range of attributes. Appearance, for example, beautiful, ugly, tall, short, color like red, blue, vibrant, size such as large, tiny, enormous, shape like round, square, triangular, texture such as smooth, rough, soft, sound like loud, quiet, melodious, taste such as sweet, sour, bitter, and many more. The more descriptive adjectives you know and use, the richer and more engaging your communication will become. They are absolutely essential for storytelling, for writing detailed reports, or even just for making everyday conversations more interesting. When using multiple descriptive adjectives before a noun, there's often a preferred order in English, though it can be quite subtle. Generally, it goes something like opinion, lovely, awful, size, big, small, age, old, new, shape, round, square, color, red, green, origin, Italian, Chinese, material, wooden, metal, and then purpose like writing desk. For example, a lovely old Italian wooden table. Don't worry too much about memorizing this exact order initially, but be aware that it exists and you'll develop a feel for it over time. So the key takeaway here is to actively build your vocabulary of descriptive adjectives. When you learn a new noun, try to think of some adjectives that could describe it. When you're reading, pay attention to how authors use adjectives to create imagery and atmosphere. The more you practice using them, the more naturally they will come to you, allowing you to paint vivid pictures with your words and express yourself with greater precision and flair. This really is where language comes alive, moving beyond basic statements to truly expressive communication. Chapter 6. Let's shift gears a little and talk about a crucial aspect of written English paragraphing. While not a part of speech like an adjective or a noun, understanding how to structure paragraphs effectively is fundamental to clear and organized writing. A paragraph is a distinct section of writing that deals with a single topic or a particular point. Think of paragraphs as building blocks. Each one contributes to the overall structure and message of your text, whether it's an essay, an email, a report, or even a blog post. Proper paragraphing makes your writing easier to read and understand. So, what makes a good paragraph? Typically, a well-structured paragraph in English academic or formal writing has three main components: a topic sentence, supporting sentences, and often a concluding or transition sentence. The topic sentence is usually the first sentence, and it introduces the main idea or focus of the paragraph. It's like a mini thesis statement for that specific paragraph, telling the reader what they are about to learn or explore. It should be clear and concise, setting the stage for what follows. Following the topic sentence, you have the supporting sentences. These sentences do exactly what their name suggests. They support, explain, illustrate, or provide evidence for the main idea presented in the topic sentence. This is where you elaborate, give examples, offer facts, share statistics, or provide reasoning. These sentences need to be clearly connected to the topic sentence and to each other, developing the main point in a logical and coherent way. Without strong supporting details, a topic sentence remains just an assertion without substance. Finally, many well-constructed paragraphs end with a concluding sentence or a transition sentence. A concluding sentence might summarize the main point of the paragraph or offer a final thought on it. A transition sentence, on the other hand, helps to link the current paragraph smoothly to the next one, creating a good flow in your writing. This helps the reader follow your train of thought as you move from one idea to another. Not every single paragraph needs an explicit concluding sentence, especially shorter ones, but it's a good practice for more developed points. The importance of paragraphing cannot be overstated. It breaks down complex information into manageable chunks, preventing your reader from being overwhelmed by a wall of text. Each new paragraph signals a shift in focus or the introduction of a new aspect of your overall topic. When you're writing, always think, what is the main point I want to make in this paragraph? And ensure all your sentences in that paragraph relate directly to that point. This discipline will make your writing much more professional, organized, and persuasive. Hey there, following on from our discussion about paragraphing and creating flow, let's talk about sequencing words. You might have heard them called transition words for sequence, or maybe temporal linkers. They're incredibly useful little words and phrases that help us organize our ideas clearly, especially when we're describing a process, narrating a story, or presenting information step by step. These words signal the order in which events or steps occur, guiding the reader or listener smoothly from one point to the next. Without them, our narratives or instructions could become, confusing and difficult to follow. Some of the most common sequencing words include first or firstly, second or secondly, next, then, after that, subsequently, meanwhile, before, after, finally, lastly, or in conclusion. Think of them as signposts indicating where we are in a sequence of events or arguments. For instance, if you're explaining how to bake a cake, you might start with first, Gather all your ingredients. Next, preheat the oven. Then mix the flour and sugar. Each sequencing word clearly marks the progression of steps. Using sequencing words not only makes your instructions or stories easier to understand, but also adds a sense of coherence and logical structure to your writing and speaking. They help create a narrative flow, making the connections between different parts of your discourse explicit. Imagine reading a set of instructions without any sequencing words. It would be a jumbled mess. These words provide the framework that holds the information together in a logical order, ensuring your audience can follow along without getting lost. It's important to vary your choice of sequencing words to avoid repetition and to suit the context. While first, second, third is straightforward, in more sophisticated writing, you might use phrases like "to begin with," following this, "in the subsequent stage," and "ultimately." The choice depends on the formality of the context and the complexity of the sequence you're describing. For example, in a historical account, you might use words like initially, thereafter, and eventually to describe the progression of events over time. So, when you're planning to describe a process, tell a story, or present information that has a clear order, think consciously about the sequencing words you'll use. They're essential tools for clarity and organization. Practice incorporating them into your speaking and writing. You'll find that they not only help your audience, but also help you structure your own thoughts more effectively before you even begin to communicate them. They are small words, but they have a big impact on the overall effectiveness of your message. Making comparisons, understanding comparatives and superlatives. Now let's dive into the world of comparisons with comparative and superlative adjectives and adverbs. These grammatical forms are essential whenever we want to compare two or more things, people, or actions. They help us to express differences in qualities, characteristics, or manner. Understanding how to form and use them correctly will make your English much more precise and descriptive, allowing you to articulate preferences, evaluate options, and describe things in relation to one another. Let's start with comparative adjectives. We use comparative adjectives when we are comparing two things or people. For most short adjectives, one syllable or two syllables ending in y, we form the comparative by adding to the end. For example, tall becomes taller, fast becomes faster, and happy becomes happier. Notice the y changes to I. We often use the word than after the comparative adjective. She is taller than her brother. This car is faster than that one. For longer adjectives, usually two syllables not ending in y or three or more syllables, we don't add Instead, we use the word more or less for the opposite comparison before the adjective. For example, beautiful becomes more beautiful, expensive becomes more expensive, and interesting becomes more interesting. So, you would say, this painting is more beautiful than that one, or this book is less interesting than the movie. There are also some irregular comparatives, like good becomes better, bad becomes worse, and far becomes farther or further. Next, we have superlative adjectives. We use superlative adjectives when we are comparing three or more things or people and want to say that one of them is at the extreme end of a quality, the most or the least. For short adjectives, we usually add est and often use the before it. Tall becomes the tallest, fast becomes the fastest, happy becomes the happiest. For example, she is the tallest person in her family. This is the fastest car in the race. For longer adjectives, we use the most or the least before the adjective. So beautiful becomes the most beautiful, expensive becomes the most expensive. For example, this is the most beautiful painting in the gallery. That was the least interesting lecture of the series. And again, we have those irregular superlatives. Good becomes the best, bad becomes the worst, and far becomes the farthest or the furthest. Adverbs can also have comparative and superlative forms, often using more / most or less, least. For example, quickly, more quickly, most quickly. Adding depth, the function of subordinate clauses. Let's explore a slightly more advanced but incredibly important concept: subordinate clauses. Now, a clause is a group of words that contains a subject and a verb. An independent clause, or main clause, can stand alone as a complete sentence because it expresses a complete thought. For example, the sun was shining. That's an independent clause. A subordinate clause, however, also has a subject and a verb, but it cannot stand alone as a complete sentence because it does not express a complete thought. It depends on an independent clause to make sense. Subordinate clauses are also known as dependent clauses. They add extra information to the main clause, information about time, place, reason, purpose, condition, contrast, or they can describe a noun. They often begin with a subordinating conjunction like although, because, since, if, when, while, unless, after, before, or a relative pronoun like who, whom, whose, which, that. For example, in the sentence, I went to the park after I finished my homework, the part after I finished my homework is a subordinate clause. It tells us when I went to the park. There are different types of subordinate clauses, such as adverbial clauses, which act like adverbs, modifying a verb, adjective, or another adverb, like our after I finished my homework example. Adjective clauses, also called relative clauses, which act like adjectives modifying a noun or pronoun. For example, the book that I'm reading is very interesting. And noun clauses, which act as nouns. For example, what she said surprised me. Understanding these different types can be helpful, but the main thing is to recognize that they add detail and context to the main idea of the sentence. Using subordinate clauses allows you to create more complex and sophisticated sentences. Instead of writing many short, simple sentences, you can combine ideas logically and show the relationships between them. For instance, instead of "It was raining, we stayed inside," you could write "Because it was raining, we stayed inside," or "We stayed inside because it was raining." Notice how the subordinate clause "because it was raining" explains the reason for the action in the main clause "we stayed inside." Learning to identify and use subordinate clauses effectively is a key step towards more fluent and mature English writing and speaking. Pay attention to sentence structures when you read. Notice how longer sentences are often formed by combining an independent clause with one or more subordinate clauses. Practice creating your own complex sentences by adding these dependent parts to your main ideas. This will greatly enhance the richness and clarity of your expression, allowing you to convey more nuanced meanings. Looking back, mastering the past simple tense. Finally, let's tackle a tense that is absolutely fundamental to talking about experiences, stories, and completed actions. The past simple tense. We use the past simple to talk about actions or situations that started and finished at a specific time in the past. If you're telling someone what you did yesterday, last week, or many years ago, you'll be using the past simple. It's one of the most commonly used tenses in English, so getting it right is crucial for clear communication about past events. Forming the past simple for regular verbs is quite straightforward. You usually just add ed to the base form of the verb. For example, walk becomes walked, play becomes played, talk becomes talked. If the verb already ends in E, you just add D, like live becomes lived, dance becomes danced. For verbs ending in a consonant plus we, you change the Y to I and add ed, so study becomes studied, try becomes tried. These regular patterns make up a large number of English verbs. However, English is also famous for its irregular verbs, and these don't follow the ed rule for the past simple. Unfortunately, these have to be memorized. Some common irregular verbs include go, which becomes went, eat becomes ate, see becomes saw, take becomes took, come becomes came, do becomes did, and be has two past simple forms, was for I, he, she, it, and were for you, we, they. Making a list of common irregular verbs and practicing them regularly is the best way to learn them. When do we use the past simple? We use it for completed actions in the past, often with time expressions that indicate a finished past time, such as yesterday, last night, last week, 3 years ago, in 1999. For example, I watched a movie last night. She visited Paris in 2010. They played football yesterday afternoon. It's also used for a sequence of actions in the past, like telling a story. He woke up, got dressed, ate breakfast, and went to work. Each action is completed before the next one begins. To make negative sentences in the past simple, we use did not, or the contraction didn't. followed by the base form of the verb, not the past simple form. For example, I did not walk to school, not I did not walked. She didn't eat lunch. For questions we use did at the beginning, followed by the subject and then the base form of the verb. Did you watch the movie? Did they play football? For the verb to be, negatives and questions are formed differently. He wasn't tired. Were they late? Mastering the past simple, including its regular and irregular forms, negatives and questions, is essential for everyday conversation and storytelling. Your grammar journey continues. And there we have it, a comprehensive look at 10 essential topics in English grammar, from the nuances of adjectives to the structure of the past simple tense. I truly hope that breaking these down has made them feel more approachable and that you've gained some valuable insights and clarity today. Remember, mastering grammar is a journey, not a race. It's about consistent practice, patience with yourself, and celebrating those small victories along the way. Each concept we've covered is a tool you can now use to express yourself more accurately and confidently in English. I encourage you to revisit these topics, practice them with exercises, and try to notice them when you're reading or listening to English. The more you engage with the language, the more these grammatical structures will become second nature. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. They are a natural part of the learning process. The key is to learn from them and keep moving forward. You've taken a fantastic step today by investing this time in your learning, and that's something to be proud of. Thanks so much for watching this video and for joining me, Shahid, on this grammar exploration. If you found this video helpful and you learned something new, please do give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to share it with anyone else you think might benefit. For more English learning tips, grammar explanations and vocabulary lessons, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Keep practicing and keep learning.